Hello, everyone, and welcome to Books Undone. I'm your host, Livia J. Elliot, and today we are in for another guest talk with a fairly unconventional, fantastic, and utterly baffling short story, The Library of Babel by Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges. Before we go ahead, let me introduce you to the group that joins me today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this story. I read it last night and it blew my mind a little bit.
Hi, I'm Jose and I run the Jose's Amazing Worlds YouTube channel.
Hello, my name is Susana Imáginario. I am the author of Timelessness and I run the Den of the Wyrd YouTube channel.
Hi, I'm Jarrod. I run the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and this story was a trip.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I'm really excited about this one. Before we start, let me do the usual disclaimers. First, there are spoilers in this podcast. The Library of Babel is an 8-page short story, and the spoilers pertain only to the short story. We will not be discussing the anthology in which it was published, titled Ficciones. Second, what you will hear is our subjective interpretation of this story, also biased by the time and places in which we live. Borges may have had many other intentions, and you may have a different interpretation. It's fine. You are allowed to disagree. As a bit of a trivia, Jorge Luis Borges wrote this story in 1941 in La Plata, Argentina. His career as a poet undoubtedly influenced his way of writing. Borges' works have contributed to the philosophical literature and the fantasy genre, and not only is he considered one of the fundamental authors of magical realism, his works are often classified as slipstream, exploring motifs such as dreams, labyrinth, and mythology. So, let's get started with one question. One of the most common interpretations for this story is that Borges wrote it to encourage other people to chase knowledge, even though most of their searches within the short stories seem fruitless. Any success will actually change the world in here. So, what are your thoughts on this idea?
Interestingly, of all the places I went to for the interpretation of the story, I think I sort of latched onto one interpretation of the story. So that one sounds new to me. I like it. I can see how that might be true about the encouragement for the search of knowledge. It's more, you're right, it is feel fruitless. Maybe I'll talk about my interpretation and we'll see. The core of what's going on in the story, I think, is a search for meaning in the infinity of the universe that is defined here, right? Because people are trying to find meaning for existence, trying to figure out why humans and what their purpose is here, and coming up with various explanations for it. So yeah, perhaps that is the chase for knowledge, but I don't know that there's any encouragement there per se. But also, I think what I found as I went through it is like a lot of parallels to our own universe. So I was like, yeah, you wrote a different universe that's exactly like ours, which I find fascinating. So that was what I focused my attention on. Yeah, I'm curious to see what the knowledge interpretation fans out to in parts of the story.
That's interesting. That definitely gives you that sense of knowledge is to be searched for, but knowledge is also seems infinite. And he also mentions that, he's preparing to search for knowledge, but also once he's dead, it's kind of unceremonious and like as if that knowledge wasn't fruitful to him when he got it. And it's kind of this contrast basically of wanting all this knowledge and this idea that it's so infinite that you're also not going to get what you want. And so it's a contradiction, just like infinite and not infinite, because he brings up that infinite thing a lot, and he brings up that it can't be infinite, and so there's like a lot of contrast in a lot of the wording and a lot of the which life can be like that. And so
would you then buy into the reasoning, or like do you think one of the things that it's saying, or some of the characters in the book are saying, that since we are pursuing the infinite and there's no point, we're not even going to make a dent in this, why bother? Did that come across at any of the things that people do in their journeys across the library?
It's easy to get that sense of why bother from the story, and I'm trying to look through it and find that, where is like the very last line is his solitude is gladdened by this elegant hope. So there is a sense of hope to be read somewhere deep into this story. It's not easy to find because there's a lot of infinite, and there's not much resolution in what they're looking for. So somewhere in here, and it's pretty convoluted, a lot of this writing, a lot of these paragraphs. So it's somewhere in here there is that elegant hope that he's trying to get, and that I think he wants us to get as well.
There are two things that come up from what you said. One, at the start, it is actually defined that the library is infinite. In the second page, I think it says that the library has existed ab eternity, something like that, like forever. There is this whole discussion that the librarians are imperfect, therefore make the books imperfect, or the search for the books imperfect. What you made me think of is perhaps a different interpretation is somehow mentioned that the library is a world, and in that case, each hexagon will be a person's knowledge, figuratively and literally. In that case, at the end of the story, they mention that every event is recorded multiple ways, in ways that are wrong and in ways that are correct. So each book will be each person's interpretation of the same event, because we may all be here on this stream, but at the same time, we all have different interpretations, thoughts, and things about that event. So that's why there will be many books, if the books are the people's knowledge.
I think I read this as a bit of a masterclass on how to take a real world concept and obscure the hell out of it in an alternate reality. This reads to me almost exactly like a description of our universe. So I wrote down a list of parallels I found. Like there's, of course, the parallel universes where he says that, there people go and burn books, but then there are other books that differ by just a word. It's like I don't know if we had these interpretations in 1941 yet. There are some parallel world interpretations where like you go and you make a different decision, you split off into a parallel world and things like that. So the different books that differ by just a word, that reminded me of that theory of the shape of the universe, where he talks about how the library is a sphere and what every point is a center of that sphere, which not exactly our universe, but like, you could transpose that into some theories of the shape of our universe. And then there's anthropocentric views of, the world, the universe exists because it's perfect in like the hexagon is a perfect shape for humans to perceive. Okay. Which again, like you can transpose to some of the real world theories that we have about the universe. So I sort of just latched onto that interpretation, and I saw so many parallels, which was amazing to me that he just wrote about our universe and a lot of theories around it, but in this weird, strange world where, and I think like the letters that make up the books, I think you could equate that with the periodic table, and the books could be stars. So like that was the interpretation I latched onto, and I thought it was brilliant, every single thing that he did from there on. Why did I get into this tangent from what you said? I'm trying to remember. You were talking about that books are people. Is that the one I jumped off?
Especially because he says that every book, it doesn't matter how different it is, the underlying elements are the same, which are the same 25 letters.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we're all the same. We're all people, right? So that's why.
It occurs to me that you could take this interpretation of what books mean and then like really fan out and say interpret everything else in that context. Like for yours, it's like books are people, and like books are stars, or books are just straight up knowledge, and you can interpret other parts of the story. I really like that.
Yes, my interpretation now, it's a bit outdated because I really loved what Livia said about being different perspective of people. So I got a very pessimistic view of the text. So it was about this, or I had a more philosophical interpretation about the futility of trying to comprehend the universe, how impossible and even pointless it is to try to know it all. There's probably something there about the different perspectives in the different books. And then I went in this little tangent while Varsha was talking. It's almost as if he foreseen the internet, because it's kind of like we have all the knowledge at our fingertips and it's just all biased from whatever is uploaded, and we can't find anything. And when we do find anything, we don't know if it's real. Let's not even get into AI, but yes, I think we are not built to actually understand everything, even if we had all the knowledge at our disposition in this library or computer or whatever. Our brains.
I think that's a very cool interpretation, that impossibility of finding the books within the library correlates to our impossibility of understanding everything. I think it's, in general, everything we do is quite anthrocentric at the end of the day, because that's humanity's shared perspective. But this one makes so many parallelisms. And if you take it in that way, it's afterwards, it will mean like everything a person learned, it remains in the library, or it may be lost in that hexagon without a librarian that cannot be found, such as the knowledge of a person who lived and died and never left anything written.
I think I lean more towards Susana's take. I'm not very familiar with Borges's work, but I think he had some kind of, it's not the first time that I read something by him, where he's got some mathematical leanings and some sort of interest in mathematics. And there's a lot of mathematics throughout this story, because it's not just, he's chosen the hexagon for a very particular reason, in the sense that the hexagon is the most efficient 2D shape that would tessellate any surface. That's why bees make beehives in hexagonal shapes. And also, he talks about the 25 characters that make up the text, but he's very descriptive about how many books there are in each shelf, how many shelves there are in each hexagonal room, how many lines each page has, how many pages, each juxtaposition of terms, where he tries to convey the idea that the universe is infinite. However, it's not, because once you figure out all the combinations and permutations of these 25 characters in so many books, the knowledge is actually finite. It's just a number that is way too vast for us to comprehend. So you got that contradiction there. And I think that in general, he was just trying to, in a much more fancy literary way, convey the idea of infinity of the universe. And, the story was written at a time where there was major upheaval in the sciences, because just 20 years prior, Einstein had come up with the theory of relativity. World War II was going on, and we were only 2 years away from the atomic bomb. There was a period of the sciences being very prominent in the world at the time. And I think he was just doing his bit to convey that notion of the ever-expanding universe. And I guess in a very atheist way, and I think I agree with Susana's take, we cannot comprehend that. And it's not, like, you cannot rely on a superior intelligence or a God figure, because, it's too vast a world to understand. And I think that's my interpretation of the story.
I think you have this library that contains all these books, each unique, and that's like a direct metaphor for the earth containing all people, each individual and unique. And sure, you can go back and, we don't have the figures for it, but you could, there was a finite amount of people on the planet up to this point. It's as unbelievably big as that number is, but how many more people are going to be in the future? That is where you run into the number. And so there's your juxtaposition about, there is a certain number of books, but there isn't a certain number of books, and because this library doesn't seem to have the same kind of time strictures that we have. There's, that's your juxtaposition. And so all these interpretations and theories are all not mutually exclusive at all. It's all, there's room in there for all of it. And that's part of the beauty of the story, and also part of the maybe frustration or complexity of it.
I love what you said about people and like future history, because then you could, in theory, interpret the fact that the hexagons repeat themselves after a certain, like, walking through this for centuries, and then the hexagons repeat themselves as like history repeating itself, like history, this notion that you could see human history in as some sort of like having a periodic cyclic nature, not necessarily, but like you might talk about the rise and fall of cultures and societies. That could be a possible interpretation with the repetition of the hexagons. I like that.
I wanted to follow up on that. I had that idea as well of history repeating itself, but in a different way, perhaps, because what someone lived another person also lived, but their experience may be different. So just to give a very common event, one people may be graduating, another people may be graduating on the same ceremony, but how they got there and everything else may be completely different. And suppose that someone's family is there, but the other person is not. So they have also feelings affecting their emotions. So that in Babel's library will lead to different books about the same event, which narrate different things, and they are both correct and both wrong at the same time.
There's also some meta commentary that you could interpret this text also however you want, or something that makes you think, yeah, he's talking about this exact story, that you could interpret this however you want. Yeah. You who read me, are you certain you understand my language? I think this in the passage where he talks about each person can interpret the books that they read in their way. Like they talk about how they have allegory and metaphor, and even the nonsense, even the books that seem like nonsense, people have interpretations of them, and depending on the language and what their background is. So yeah, I love that little meta note there. Are you interpreting me as the right way?
And that's actually quite correct. For example, when we do the sci-fi masterworks discussions, many of us oftentimes have very different interpretations of the same passage, or generally biased to who we are or what we have experienced.
I mean, I think that's true of reading literature or maybe reading in general, but yeah, I think to insert that specifically about this story, because I mean, already we have 5 different ways to look at it. That makes sense that you would add that note about this story as well.
So the libraries give us a very optimistic outlook, but also a pessimistic outlook. So there is one moment in which it says that, yeah, the library has everything, and therefore, I'm going to read a quote, there was no personal problem, no world problem, whose eloquent solution did not exist somewhere in some hexagon. But they never tell you in which one. I read that line as a bit of hope driving mankind or humankind, because we know that any problem could be solved if we put our minds to it, that we are creative enough to find a solution. But where is that solution? Who is the person that will think out of the box enough to bring that solution? And that's perhaps what leads the librarians within the library to spend so much time looking for it.
I think it's a tale of caution, because it goes on the different things that happened and over the years, and what people did with the knowledge. They were the ones that would just give up and kill themselves, the ones that started burning books, the ones that kept looking for, that key book that had all the answers to the other books, etc. If such a thing exists, if all knowledge was accessible, cautionary tale of who would have access to it and what would they do? Because we're definitely not equipped to handle this much knowledge, and just the problems when knowledge falls into the wrong hands, or just when people set out seeking knowledge for the wrong reasons or under false premises.
There's also an additional comment there about you can try to be dangerous and try to destroy books, for instance. There's a faction that goes about burning books, but you wouldn't make a dent in the universe. The universe doesn't care. There are other books to replace you, and you're not even burning a percentage. So I think, yeah, that rides nicely what you said with
that is pointless. The futility of it all. Yeah, but it still causes problems. And I imagine the poor librarian whose hexagon got burned down and then you have to move.
Yeah, definitely. I think the small scale problems are big, but I think we read some other sci-fi short stories recently where human endeavors seem so small if you compare to the vastness of the universe. So I love that little juxtaposition too, that, there are all these big deal things, people seeking knowledge and so on, but also you can go burn books. That's fine. You destroy your planet, but the rest of the universe will survive.
And there's also some sense that if you have a search for knowledge, even if you're not the one who finds it, there's a sense that it's still there for somebody else to find. So take out the individual aspect of having of the ego of having it to be you, and let it carry on. So that's as a slight glimmer of hope that he mentions at the end of the story.
I think combined with other parts of the story, this would be a positive outlook, what Jarrod said and what Livia said earlier, because it's not clear whether this is just the narrator's theory or if it's established about this universe, that all you need to know is that a book is possible and you know that it exists in the library. Combine that with, the search for knowledge, the ultimate knowledge that it is possible and it exists. Is it? Yeah.
But it's cautionary too, because he warns against superstition. He warns against the man of the book, which is, some would equate to God. And he warns against young men prostrating themselves before books and kissing the pages in a barbarous manner,
without actually reading the book.
Which is kind of, you could equate that with some religious text today, how many people follow these texts but never read them, and those cautionaries are all in there as well.
I wanted to touch on that point exactly about the people that don't read, or the librarians that don't read the book. He actually makes quite a long point about it, and there is a division. It appears to be a division of people between the ones that actually read them and the ones that treasure them. I think when I was reading it, something that it made me wonder is how useful can it be to have that knowledge and actually don't use it, don't read it, nothing, right? Knowledge for the sake of knowledge is pointless if you don't apply it. It loses the meaning, and which could be something of an allegory to having the book and worshipping the book as well.
I'm not sure about that, actually, because going back to the mathematics of the story, many things in mathematics we did or we discovered because we could. And then later on, we found the uses for them. So sometimes knowledge for the sake of knowledge is actually good. Just to give an example about imaginary numbers, right? The square roots of negative numbers, they don't exist. But then in math, we go, well, let's imagine they exist. That's why they're called imaginary numbers. And then we do all these things with them. Turns out later on, apparently, they're quite useful for flying planes and stuff like that. You don't know what the ramifications are going to be of what you're doing later on down the road. I'm sure that when the first two computers were linked up together, no one knew exactly what was going to come out of it, which is exactly what we're doing now. So
it is knowledge still gathered to be passed down. If it wasn't passed down, it would have been useless knowledge, So at least it even though they might not have known the original purpose of what they were gathering, it was passed down. So that's a fine line, I guess.
I think it's also a perspective of time. If you are looking at it now and you don't have the purpose of that knowledge yet, then you will say it's useless, or people could claim it's useless. But in retrospective, it may become very useful, as Jose said, that idea. And there is one line that he says at the end of the story. But I suspect that the human species, the only species, teeters at the verge of extinction, yet that the library, enlightened, solitary, infinite, perfectly unmoving, armed with precious volumes, pointless, incorruptible, and secret, will endure. So even after humanity is gone, our knowledge and everything we found will endure. In records, in radios, and the waves, they are still going through the universe. We are still streaming to the universe our knowledge. So even if we don't exist as people, the knowledge exists. In that case, it wouldn't be pointless. It wouldn't be knowledge for the sake of the knowledge. It will be knowledge for the sake of existing through it.
I didn't notice it until you read it out loud, but he's saying the library is pointless, incorruptible, and secret. Pointless. So is he saying that the existence of the library is pointless without the human race to interpret it? Is that about the knowledge that was streaming out into the world that only humans who generated this can interpret? Or is it more the anthropocentric interpretation, like the theories of the universe, that the universe exists for humans to populate it?
Which is weird, because he also says solitary, because they are all isolated within their hexagons. But the pointless is interesting because, especially if you compare it to the line before that was so hopeful that the knowledge exists somewhere, in that case it wouldn't be pointless.
Yeah.
I guess it all depends on how if you take the library as a metaphor for the world or the universe, then yes, of course, the universe is going to go on no matter whether humanity exists or not. Is that what the library is, or is the library some compilation of human knowledge?
or both.
Or both.
So there was one bit I had it with a question mark because got a bit lost. It's when it was announced that the library contained all books, the first reaction was unbounded joy. But then at the end of that paragraph, when it's talking about the Vindicators, and he goes, the Vindicators do exist. I have seen 2 of them, which refer to persons in the future, persons perhaps not imaginary. But those who went in quest of them failed to recall that the chance of a man's finding his own vindication, or some perfidious version of his own, can be calculated to be 0. I had a huge question mark in front of this paragraph. That's like, okay, now I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm posing the question to José because this is definitely math. At the beginning, I thought he was writing because he says that the universe was justified. The universe suddenly became congruent with the unlimited width and breadth of humankind's hope. So that's when you justify the text. But it went from there to maths, and I don't get what he's trying to say with this. Like, don't go looking for the Vindicators, don't expect there's no future. What is your interpretation?
The thing is, when he's talking about giving those adjectives to the library, and the one about solitary, to me, that's like we are the only, as far as we're aware, inhabited or with intelligent life forms in our known universe. We are the only planet. So in this infinite universe that is out there, we are alone, so far as we know. And I think it's only after humans evolved to kind of the state where we're at that we've started that quest for knowledge. We're a little bit different from all other species because we have that capacity to reason logically. So I think that there's a tipping point to that. And that's maybe what it's referring to, that once we acquired that logical thinking process, we started questioning why we're here. Where do we come from? Where are we going? And I think this goes back to that sort of atheist, slightly, it's not positive, it's not optimistic, it's not pessimistic. It's just that this is what it is. And it's our inability to grasp or to accept that we are insignificant in the universe. As Varsha was saying before, it's our view of the world is so anthropocentric that we cannot comprehend that we really don't matter.
Well, is the vindication with a capital V, that's just humans trying to find their reason for existence, the vindication of their existence.
Is that figure for a god, for superior intelligence?
Or maybe that, yeah. Or maybe both. And it's saying the possibility of finding that is 0, computed as 0. Back to your math. And there's also that treacherous variation, so that which tells me that a lot of this stuff can be misinterpreted and wrongly seen as a vindication, even though it's not.
I like that. I think I had an additional thing since we're talking about the vindications. Let's say that this narrator is right about having found books writing up people's lives who have come in the future. I think there's a slight question there about free will and determinism. Then by extension, I think everybody would have a book documenting their life, unless we have reason to believe that those people are special for some reason. But let's say everybody has a book documenting their life and that's their vindication, so to speak. Then if that exists in the world, then also I think it leads to questions of free will and determinism in this universe, which I thought was a really good plant. Like, it's not making commentary on it either way. It's there for us to ponder if we choose to.
Oh, I look at it a bit different, because in the text it says that the vindicators were looking for prophecies that will vindicate for all time the actions of every person in the universe and that held wondrous arcana for men's future. So it's not a book recording their own lives. It's a book that gives or provides the why they are doing something. And based on that, what will happen in the future. At the end of the same paragraph, the sentence that Susana pointed out, it says that people from the future go to the past to find those books. I read that as a quest for what is the meaning of life, with a twist. Because if we ask, what is the meaning of life, we are expecting to find the answer somehow. And therefore, the vindicators will go in to find books, to find knowledge as a way of explaining the meaning of life, instead of crafting the meaning for themselves. If you think of what is the meaning of life as an active thing to do. Therefore, your entire journey, your entire actions through your life should explain or provide meaning to you, right? The meaning is personal. These people don't do it. These people want the answer provided by something else. Therefore, they go to the past and find the solution. The possibility is zero, because what was the meaning for one person is not going to be the meaning for oneself. Each of us is different. Therefore, you're never going to find it. You have to craft it for yourself.
I like that. I like that very much. I think in a bit of an extension to what you said, I feel like everything that is described about what the various factions do is boiling down to like the man's search for meaning, just all the different ways that people go about it. For instance, some like to burn books to do it, some like to go on long pilgrimages to find the one book, and others are looking for their meaning of existence in another book. Others are trying to just, come up with theories about how the library works. So I think ultimately at the core, I think this is what I started with, like at the core of the story, I think is all the ways that men search for meaning. That's what is sort of documented here, I feel like. And once again, I think I think it's masterclass in writing about the real world without writing about the real world, because everything in here, I think every sentence here, you could in theory come up with a real world parallel.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Agree.
He was always quite metaphorical in everything he wrote. Now, what are your thoughts on the censorship within this? They start telling that these people came in, they were going through so many of the hexagons and they were actually burning them or destroying them. There is a paragraph that he says, and they were spurred on by the Holy Seal to reach someday, through unrelenting effort, the books of a crimson hexagon, books smaller than natural books omnipotent, illustrated, and magical. And then he goes to the book man. So one way of reading it is, religion, but could it be the unattainable? Just in a very broad way, the knowledge that is unattainable, or the things that the explanations that we are not going to find, those questions that are too open, too rhetorical to even have an answer?
Or is it that sometimes new knowledge renders old knowledge obsolete, and people are reluctant to accept change? Maybe it's a metaphor for that, as the age of reason and science took over the age of religion and spiritualism, and some people will fight against that.
It's pretty good. I like that.
Thanks. So that's my moment for the month.
You always throw those very interesting takes, Jose. But it's interesting if you look at it that way, because how many times in history knowledge has rendered other knowledge useless? Like we have the idea of the atom, I think, before that it was a ether, and there is always something that will change everything that came before and whatever else we are missing. But in that sense, we will never find it either, because we can always find more knowledge that renders prior knowledge useless or wrong, right? It's a cycle, as the library itself poses.
I was saying there's also some Buddhist philosophy thrown in there, I think, on the second page of the story. At least that's how I read it as, where it says, what mystics claim that their ecstasies reveal to them a circular chamber containing an enormous circular book with a continuous spine that goes completely around the walls. If you go with the interpretation that books are people, then, all people are one, and like all the souls meet up to the supreme soul, or whatever the Buddhist philosophy. It feels a little bit like that, maybe. Or the other way, I think that's more expanded on later on in the story, when he talks about the book that describes all the other books, like that contains all the knowledge that's contained in all the other books. Is that like the search for the unified theory that combines relativity and quantum mechanics, or like whatever Einstein was looking for before he died? I thought, those were two other things that stood out to me.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, but not Varsha, you make that point. It seems to me Borges really did have some sort of tuning to the science going on in his time and mathematics that probably I don't think many other authors seem to have. I think in general, my perception is that, authors are some are very good at their craft, or they know a lot about their craft, but they don't seem to straddle, the science and the arts, whereas Borges seemed to really do that really well. I suppose there are some sort of science. I don't know what's the word I'm looking for in English. Propagators, people that write about science to spread this knowledge, but they're not really creators of literature like Borges was.
This story just read to me like all the theories of the universe at the time rolled into like this one story.
There was one thing that
go
caught
ahead.
my attention when reading it. I haven't got the story with me, but at some point he makes reference, I think it's to someone from the future, and he talks about kind of the ethnic mix, and he describes sort of the ethnicity of this person, and it's such a weird melting pot. Like he, talks about their ancestry as being, I cannot quite recall it, but like a real mix of everything you could think of in humanity, and it's kind of like reminding me of that South Park episode where they get visited from someone from the future, and again the people from the future are this sort of weird mix of all the different races on the earth and stuff. And I quite like that notion of mixing different peoples.
Which then leads me to the question of how, because at any point in the story there are couples presented. There is no mention that there is any way for families to exist, because every hexagon has a single librarian that is a lone librarian, and it appears that they are all men. That's another question of how they keep coming up, the librarians. That's if you take it in a very literal way. At the same time, there is no idea of how the library continues to exist, how more people come in. So when I read that part, it was weird also, because of how can it be that this library exists that doesn't have frontiers as we have in our current world, yet he's using those terms and that idea to present this person.
Good point.
I don't have answers either, but I have more questions. Apparently, they all sleep upright. So uncomfortable.
And then there's one bit where he mentions that one book, he mentioned his father. So that includes, that assumes families, but never mind that we don't hear anything about women. But
or
how
children.
Would that work? Or children, yes. But, he mentions the father. So how would that work if there's only one librarian it gets complicated.
Hermaphrodite librarians.
They
are all Athena. They were just born from their brains, from their mind.
That would be apt. It would be apt. Going with the metaphors of knowledge.
I got a bit hung up here when he goes on, is after he mentions the father, that there was a book with the letters MCV perversively repeated from the first to the last. And another, much consulted in this zone, he made a point, is a labyrinth of letters whose penultimate page contained the phrase, "O time, thy pyramids." So I've been playing around because MCV, I was like, oh, maybe that's Roman numerals. So, but I can't, for the life of me, create a correlation between the number or pyramids or time in any shape or form. And I spend some time trying to figure that one out, because it then goes and repeats again, MCV, that 400 pages of unvarying MCVs cannot belong to any language. Some have suggested that each letter influences the next, and that the value of MCV on page 71, line 3 is not the same value. Why? Can someone explain?
If you get all the possible combinations of the 25 elements in those books, in those many shelves, with those many pages, you're going to get nonsense. You're gonna, it's like that thing about if you had infinite monkeys with infinite typewriters and infinite time, just randomly typing, eventually they will come up with Shakespeare's works, just by probability. So I think sometimes you get nonsense, and we try to explain it, and we don't get past the fact that it's just nonsense.
Well, there are leagues of senseless cacophonies, verbal jumbles, and incoherencies that relates to your the monkey statement. Leagues of it.
I'm just now realizing I was wondering why there are limited combinations of words, but I'm just now realizing that the books are all the same size. That's laid out pretty early on. I'd forgotten about that. I'm like, how are you saying there are only finite combinations? But I did have a question that I was hoping to pick the brain of some of the mythology experts in this group on. Why is the story called The Library of Babel? What about Babel tells us?
Well, it's a very famous library. I don't know
The
much
tower,
about
it's the Tower of Babel in
the
the
Tower of Babel.
in
Yeah.
the Bible, in the Old
all
Testament.
knowledge. Yeah.
That's when humans all spoke the same language, and they tried to build a tower to reach God.
Yeah.
And God got pissed off because the God of the Old Testament wasn't very nice. And then he confused them all, and he made them all speak in different languages so they wouldn't unite together and be stronger than he was. And then they all set away and colonized the world.
Which leads to why we have some books that are gibberish and that nobody could understand them.
I see. So like all the languages, it's the reference to the languages that were born out of Babel. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, good old Catholic upbringing.
No, it's like that was brilliant.
Yeah.
All right, and here we are. I don't know. I think sometimes, do you think that the story maybe he didn't sit down and thought about all these things when writing it? He just had like, I just want to put my interpretation or sort of try to explain the infinity of the universe to the layman through a story, and then people have just gone crazy. Like with the MCV, because Susana, I was just like, it's going to be a Roman numeral. It's going to mean something. That's it's so specific about it that it's got to mean something. And then we are one of those, and then we become the people he describes. Oh, maybe that's the ultimate job. We become the people he describes, trying to find meaning to gibberish in those books, isn't it? So, 80
absolutely.
years after.
Yeah, he even types out a gibberish word. It's like DHCMRL or whatever it is, and yeah, you may be right there.
Yeah, I started reading this, and I even posted in a forum replying to Livia and Varsha that I was very confused because I spent the first 10 minutes just trying to make sense of what the library looked like, because no, you're not making sense. And then I realized, okay, I'm going to put this on hold because I need to continue with the story, and we'll get back to the visualization, because it was making such a big point about it. So I thought it was an important aspect of world building, and I just wanted to figure it out. And then I stumbled again with the MCVs, and it's one of those. I guess I just fell into the trap.
I have a weird idea about the MCV. What if it is a book that hasn't been yet released? So it's in the process of being written. It's in the library because the library contains every book that has been and will be, but it has not yet been released, quote unquote, in the sense of it has not yet written in the language that all the librarians speak. Therefore, it's this sequence. It will take a time because we have a lot of librarians. At any point in the story, it is written or explicitly told that the librarians write books. So how do the books keep being added to the library? So in this case, the book will form itself.
Yeah, I did wonder about whether or not the library is unchanging, because it feels like I got the sense that it is unchanging, that it existed like this and it will continue to exist like this to eternity. And I think that's the first axiom that he gives us too, right? That the library has always existed and will continue to exist. But I don't know if that says anything about the volumes in the library, or if it's just the physical structure of the library. But if it's including the volumes, that there's nothing unchanging. They do talk about inventing writing and stuff. Do the things that they write get added to the library, or is that just I don't know, sent into the abyss to become dust in the library? Like, yeah, I think that's an open question, unless, I don't know, did anybody read anything that tells us how the library changes and has things added to it? I felt like it was supposed to be static, but I don't know what point that would make. Maybe we interpret it the way we want.
I'm still hooked on the MCV, and what you said made me think something like perhaps this is a bit too modern outtake on it. But what if we assume that every book within the library is written by somebody, some librarian somewhere that is not explained in this case? The books are unique because they are that people's perspective. What if MCV is actually produced, not manufactured? It could be the result. If we have this is 2024, if we read it in this way, it could be an AI written book. But back in that time, MCV could be, I don't know, a book from a big publisher, something that is very structured, very repetitive, formulaic even, compared to the other books that are written for art. It could be that he was actually trying to make some commentary on it. And I'm making that point because he had a magazine, right, that was published within Argentina and that was censored a few times as well, because they were writing allegorical stuff that had some political overview. Perhaps he was complaining about that on this story. It's just a very formulaic, not thoughtful, not thematic book that exists within this library.
Yeah.
Can you hear that? Can you hear that? It's Borges laughing in the afterlife.
We are never going to know.
I like it.
I just like these letters the most, and I'm just going
40 years later, we found out they were actually the initials of somebody.
yeah. Why is the punctuation limited to just a comma and a period?
Because the semicolon is ugly. No one knows how to use them properly.
And
And
the
M
M
dashes
dash
are
is
the
not
devil.
something. No, M dash is not that used in Spanish.
Oh.
So in Spanish, you generally use a semicolon only. This one.
But you do have like quote marks, right?
Yeah.
But if the knowledge of a book is as it is and you are not quoting other books, then you don't
Exactly.
need the quote marks.
Yeah, maybe that's what it means. It goes on saying that, the books are in many languages, but every language has, different letters, different punctuations. The alphabet has different, numbers of letters. So there is some inconsistency here, because on one hand, it was written from a very Spanish language perspective, and trying to, take in every other language. And I think it was not quite successful. It got a bit confusing. So it depends. I get what he was trying to do, but at the same time, and I think he understands as well, because there's a bit when he's mentioning that a book might be written in Portuguese. Others said that it was Yiddish. And my comment was, yes, because they are so similar. But it still goes back to the fact that every language has a different number of letters in the alphabet, if nothing else, even if we don't go into the punctuation.
Do you think all the languages are transliterated to these 23 letters in the library for some reason?
They will lose meaning if they are transliterated.
Some letters don't exist in Portuguese, the NH sound is made up with an N and an H. In Spanish, we have the N with a tilde up top, so some letters don't have a one for one. Within Europe, let alone, like Chinese, that doesn't even have an alphabet. Every word is a different character. So I think maybe Borges had a very Eurocentric view of things.
Oh, I was saying, I sometimes type Hindi to my in-laws with English. So Hindi words in English. So I was thinking it might be something like that. But yeah, if some sounds are impossible to make, then yeah, that makes sense. That maybe that's not the right way to think about it.
What if Susana mentioned, and I think she's right on this, that it's inconsistent, because at one point he says that the books are in every language, but then he gives this very limited alphabet. We could translate, and we also have the books that are gibberish. Perhaps the writer, so the character that is actually narrating all of this, it's just talking about gospel. He's not presenting a law of this is how the book is, but instead this is how I believe the books are, but he presents it as a law because it's just gospel and what he believes in, therefore it is law for him, for the character. So it could be that it's just misleading because it's not true, and it's just this idea that the character has, that it has to be this way. Going back to the idea of the hexagons as the people's knowledge, we are all restricted and biased by what we know and how we view the world. Therefore, it could be the limitation of the librarian main character that we follow.
To bring it all full circle and make a lot more meta, is this an indication that we have an unreliable narrator and therefore we just discovered that his knowledge is obsolete because what he says doesn't make sense?
Yeah, I guess it comes back to that sentence of, yes, but are you certain you understand my language? You will read me.
Or I guess to add meta-ness to your meta question, Jose, does one inconsistency make the whole thing invalid? Or I guess in math, yes, but in language, can we say there are parts of this that could be true and other parts that we need to look deeper at?
No, if you're applying propositional logic, which is meant to work in every aspect, no matter what. So as soon as you get a contradiction, propositional logic is there. So you are meant to be able to talk about anything without knowing what you're talking about, without having a not just following logic rules. You're able to make conclusions or inferences. If there is a breakdown there, everything is invalid. So.
Fair enough. So if this is supposed to be a text that's placing the laws of physics, then yeah, everything is wrong. But if it's one person's interpretation of the world, then maybe there are some truths and other parts are not.
No, sorry, I was going to say, but that goes against, but I don't know, again, this could be my interpretation, but I think particularly in science, truth is objective. There's no expression I hate more these days than when people talk about my truth or their truth or your truth. Is like, no, there is, the truth is objective. And I think, we should all, and we could all agree on that. Obviously, you can have subjective tastes and interpretations, but I think in the realms of science, there is no argument. I think there is objectivity there.
Oh, that's true, definitely. But what I'm wondering is there's a difference between incomplete knowledge and false knowledge, right? So could be that the narrator has incomplete knowledge because of which he's making mistakes and giving us inconsistencies as he goes along, versus it's not an interpretation. It's just, he doesn't know enough, so he's confusing himself and us.
or he's making wrong conclusions because of incomplete knowledge. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in here. Like on the second page, he says the orthographical symbols are 25 in number. Then later on, he says there's 20 orthographical symbols. And a couple pages later, possible combinations of 20 odd. Okay, so maybe that could be 25. But then somebody earlier mentioned 23. And so there's a bunch of jumping around about how all this stuff is. Yeah, there's 22 letters of an alphabet. So there's a whole bunch of jumping around about the number of actual symbols in an alphabet or letters, and
but maybe he's precisely or purposely making that point that we discussed earlier about our inability and our impossibility to understand everything.
Right. Yeah.
And the narrator is showing his inability to explain and understand everything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you read the last line, let me make the parallelism here. He says, if an eternal traveler should journey in any direction, he will find an untold centuries at the same volumes are repeated in the same disorder, which repeated becomes order, the order in caps. So he says that whatever states eventually becomes the truth. That's why he uses the capital. So to extrapolate that to our discussion, the number of letters, it doesn't matter. It's the number of letters. Therefore, it's correct.
It exists, so it's correct. So the library is the source of truth, I suppose. But
because it cannot be incorrect, something like that.
I'm just going to share what I think is one of the bleakest things I've read. I underlined it because I think it was the sentence that hit me the most. The certainty that everything has already been written annuls us or renders us phantasmal. I know districts in which the young people prostrate themselves before books and like savages kiss their pages, though they cannot read a letter. This is it rings so true, especially these days. I don't know, I read this and that's when the story got to me because, I stopped caring about trying to make sense of things. And then this is pretty much what I take from it and how futile it is to actually know it all. But no, we keep searching. We keep going through those hexagons, trying to make sense of things.
That is true. I'm going to take what you said. I want to give you all a very modern take on this short story, which is, this was an amazing, long and thorough discussion for a short story that is only 8 pages long. As a bit of trivia, there is a Reddit subforum that tried to enact the Library of Babel, and you can go in there and try to search for some of the books, like the MCV book that we mentioned. I will leave the link in the description. Go read the story. It's very interesting. But before we go, let's do a round of outros with my guests. All their links will be in the description box.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you can find my YouTube channel where I discuss mostly fantasy books and comics at José's Amazing Worlds, and I also hold author interviews and discussions.
Thank you so much for having me today, Livia. I'm sorry, the dog. She's thanking you as well. You can find me on X as Chronodendron, and you can find my books pretty much everywhere. Series is Timelessness, first book is Wyrd Gods, and check out my channel, Den of the Wyrd.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Livia. This was a blast. And you can find me on YouTube at the Fantasy Thinker channel, and you can find me on various discussions on pagechewing.com as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this discussion. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Reading by the Rainy Mountain. The About page has links to some SFF discussion podcasts, including Speculative Speculations, where we talk about sci-fi books. Go check that out if that's of interest to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and feel free to comment with your thoughts. I always try to answer. Also, consider subscribing to my newsletter, which will get you into exclusive discussions, read-alongs, and heads up of the episodes, especially of the author's spotlights. The link will be in the description. That said, thanks for listening and happy reading.